Welcome back to JD Videography. So in today's episode, I want to talk about various crushes I've had growing up. But unlike previous videos, these will be people that don't exist in reality. That is, characters that were either drawn by hand or in computer graphics. Specifically, characters in cartoons and video games. But the same rules are going to apply to them as for real people. Firstly, I must have had at least some level of interest in them over a fair amount of time. So no one-off flings. And I'm only going to include one character from any series. Final Fantasy could very easily take over the list. I will list them in the chronological order in which I developed feelings for them. So, as always, I will start from the beginning. Well, I didn't start developing feelings for women until the mid-80s. At that time, I developed a certain affinity for one cartoon character in particular. Rock One, aka Meg Bennett from Bionic 6. She had the whole Debbie Gibson vibe that I found particularly enticing at that time. And she might be considered my first cartoon crush. Then video games began to become prevalent in my life, and this started the Nintendo era. Now I should note that video game graphics of that time had not yet attained a level of photorealism that attested to physical attraction. But cartoons, based on video games, were beginning to gain traction. And at that time, there was one particular cartoon related to video games I was quite interested in. Captain N, the Game Master. And in that cartoon was a character, Princess Lana, who was not related to any game in particular, but still had a heavenly physique. And the oblique skirt revealing a bit of thigh gave off a kind of Vanna White vibe. Anyway, I found her quite attractive and held on to that attraction for a few seasons. But there was another desire of that time that was beginning to stir within me. Perhaps something that all young boys and maybe even a few men desire to experience. That is, anthropomorphic animals. As such, I had reached my furry stage. And in this regard, I was particularly interested in one such character, Gadget Hackwrench of Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. Well, she had about as much allure as a humanized animal could have. I guess that infatuation started in about 1990 and ended by 1993. At the same time, I began interested in a video game character, two in fact, from the Final Fantasy series. In 1992, I played Final Fantasy IV and first encountered Rosa. Rydia, a young girl, wasn't as appealing, but her adult version fascinated me. Keep in mind, this was before the internet, so the only media I had of her was from the game itself. Other Final Fantasy characters, namely Celes from Final Fantasy VI, also interested me at the time. But as I was starting to become a teenager and maturing, I started looking for more humanly qualities. Well, April O'Neil of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fame was an interesting character in the television series, but it was the SNES iteration of her character that I found alluring. In 1993, I started watching Captain Planet, and in that series, I became attracted to the Russian character, Linka, which both ushered in my interest in environmentalism and Eastern European women. And that lasted until about 1995. In 1995, I played Chrono Trigger and became somewhat interested in the character Marl, and to a lesser extent, Isla. But by 1996, my interest changed completely. That was when I began watching Sailor Moon and resonated with the character Lita Kino, or Sailor Jupiter. And that persists even to this day. Not to say that I wasn't interested in other anime characters. In 1998 and 1999, I often went to the arcade at my university and played Soul Calibur, where I became somewhat smitten by the character, Seong Mina. I also had two video game interests in Nintendo 64. Saria from Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, she was a very spirited girl, and Scarlet from Dark Rift. In 1999, I spread my anime palette and became interested in many girls from various series. First, Ayaka Jirai from Tenchi Muyo, as she seemed fairly passionate. Also, the very bubbly Wakaba Shinohara from Shoujo Kakamei Utena in roughly 2000, and the bossy Asuka Langley Soryu from Neon Genesis Evangelion in 2001. This was followed by the sassy and sexy Fuko Kirisawa from Flame of Recca in 2002. I might also add that I started to develop feelings for another character in that series, Tokiya Mikagami, but since I'm only listing girls, I'll leave him out of this discussion. To round out the list, I also became interested in Ikuruya Naor from Banner of the Stars, Seika from The Legend of Himiko, and Kizuna Torek from Candidate for Goddess. With respect to video games, at that time, roughly the early 2000s, I started playing a lot of dating simulator and visual novel Ren'ai type games. And first, in about 2000, I became interested in Mira Kagami from the Tokimeki Memorial franchise. Then Sarika Kurusagawa from To Heart. Admittedly, it was a very strange time in my life. I also developed interest in Kaho Mori from Sentimental Graffiti, Amy Oba from Comic Party, and Minagi Tono from Air. Kaho got me interested in the city of Osaka in particular. Amy stirred my passion in fanfiction. In terms of other games, I became smitten by Nakaruru from Samurai Shodown, Luna from Lunar Silver Star Story, and Marlon from Atelier Marie, all of which continued until about 2008, when I kind of swore myself off video games and anime for a while, the last of which, Kamyu from Utawareru Mono, became a short infatuation, almost a kind of fling. But for the most part, my interest lies in Sailor Jupiter. My last animated love interest took the form of Velvet Scarlatina, again a kind of furry, from the series Ruby. That persisted from about 2016 until roughly today. But she never really got a lot of airtime in that series, and kind of faded out of existence, which is unfortunate. So, which characters had the greatest sway over my feelings? Well, by far, Sailor Jupiter had a tremendous percentage of my affection, starting in 1996 and continuing ever since. And if ever there was a real version of any animated character that I could possibly be with, I would have wanted it to be her. Gadget Hackwrench, a distant second, held a lot of sway in my adolescent and pre-adolescent years, starting in 1991 and continuing it until 1986. Also, somewhat surprisingly, Princess Lana helped get me to my early adolescence. And in terms of video games, Rydia maintained a sizable portion of my heart in my early adolescence, and Mira Kagami in my early adult life. And there you have it, my cartoon, anime, and video game love interests throughout my life. Are there any fictional or animated love interest in your life? Feel free to comment about it and give this a video a like, share, and subscribe. Also, consider supporting me on my Patreon. Thank you again for your time, and I'll see you next time.